Allgemeine-SS. The SS were the most famous organization of the Third Reich from 1933 to 1945. Emerging as an assault militia of the National Socialist Party during the Weimar Republic, once Adolf Hitler came to power, it soon became a state within the state and a mechanism of control over all of Europe during the Second World War. When the First World War reached its stage of stalemate after the Battle of the Marne in 1914, few could have imagined that the Western Front in France would turn into a static line of trenches stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, along which neither side would advance nor retreat. Faced with this unexpected situation, which resulted in a human bloodbath for both sides, unable to find a solution, Germany sought to remedy the problem by creating special detachments that would become famous under the name Stortruppen. The original idea of creating the Stortruppen came from a lieutenant colonel named Max Bauer, who from the Engineer Corps of the 8th Army organized a special unit specifically trained in the rapid and stealthy assault of enemy trenches, known as the Klassau Detachment, Sturmabteilung Klassau. This training, supervised by Captain Willy Ernst Rohr, lasted approximately 3 months and consisted of instruction in the use of rifles, pistols, and knives, as well as heavier weapons such as flamethrowers, machine guns, mortars, and even a single Russian-made Geschütz cannon of 76.2 millimeters. Once trained, these men were divided into groups of 3, with the following functions. The first soldier would attack with a cutting or stabbing weapon, the second carried grenades in a backpack, and the third surprised the enemy with knives and bayonets. These groups were in turn organized into platoons of 10 expert riflemen, skilled in tasks such as crossing the no-man's land from one trench to another, and infiltrating enemy lines. After the process of selection and instruction, the veterans became part of the Rohr Assault Detachment, Sturmabteilung Rohr, and were known as Stortruppen, assault troops, famous for their distinctive emblems in the form of skulls with crossed bones, called Totenkopf. At 5:26 in the morning on the 12th of October of 1915, the Rohr Assault Detachment had its baptism of fire in the Vosges when one of its advance parties set ablaze a French position with 6 flamethrowers. Then, covered by the smoke from those flamethrowers, the Stortruppen approached the enemy trench, throwing grenades and charging against the French, while isolated marksmen eliminated the machine gun posts. The trench was taken with ease and later defended against a counterattack thanks to the rapid construction of parapets. After the action, the Stortruppen gained popularity, especially after a similar feat in the Vosges at the beginning of 1916, which convinced the German High Command to expand these elite troops. During the Battle of Verdun in 1916, the Rohr Assault Detachment was once again used against the enemy to capture the French village of Fleury. Their participation in this mission ended in complete success because the unit's Stortruppen destroyed all the French machine gun nests and took the first enemy line in a few hours, suffering barely any casualties. However, in the following weeks, the Battle of Verdun became so fierce that the Rohr detachment could not meet expectations and was withdrawn to the rear to recover from its losses. Coinciding with the appointment of Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg and General Erich Ludendorff as commanders of the Western Front, on the 23rd of October of 1916, both officers authorized the creation of a battalion of Stortruppen for each army deployed in France. From that moment, the Rohr Assault Detachment was expanded into the Rohr Assault Battalion, Sturmbataillon Rohr, which in turn was replicated across all German armies in France as assault battalions, Sturmbataillone. Regarding the professionals who made up their ranks, not all remained permanently within the Stortruppen. Instead, they periodically rotated to other German army units, preferably among the light infantry, Jäger, who were chosen for such tasks. After completing the training, the Stortruppen quickly spread throughout the Austro-Hungarian army, with their main theaters of operation being the Eastern Front in Galicia and the Italian front during the battles of the Isonzo River. Even Turkey, part of the Central Powers, imitated a Stortruppen unit with the help of German officers integrated into the Ottoman Yildirim group, who fought in the Sinai and Palestine campaigns. Unexpectedly, beginning in 1917, the Allies changed the configuration of their trenches, basing them on a weak first line followed by progressively stronger fortifications. This rendered the Stortruppen's ability to exploit surprise in assaults almost useless. Fortunately, Colonel Georg Bruckmüller found a solution to this problem by employing a rapid artillery bombardment on enemy positions, immediately followed by a Stortruppen assault after the explosion of the last shell, at which point a fire barrier would begin on the second line. But the unit's evolution was not only tactical, but also material, as soldiers benefited from new camouflaged helmets, long shovels, disc-shaped grenades, and for the first time short-burst submachine guns, the Bergmann MP-18, even occasionally wearing 12-kilogram armor reminiscent of the Middle Ages. Thanks to these technical innovations, the second half of 1917 became the golden age of the Stortruppen. For example, on the Eastern Front, a group of men led by General Oskar von Hutier infiltrated and captured the Latvian capital of Riga, expelling Russian troops in September of 1917. Simultaneously on the Western Front, the Stortruppen managed to recapture in less than a week all the ground lost to British tanks during the Battle of Cambrai. Finally, on the Italian front, the success was even greater, as the Austro-Hungarian Stortruppen crushed the Italian lines in the Alpine Mountains and surrounded much of the Italian army in the decisive Battle of Caporetto. Thanks to the triumphs achieved by the Stortruppen, the German general Erich Ludendorff conceived the idea of transforming all divisions of the German army into Stortruppen divisions. However, the material shortages suffered by the Central Powers due to the British naval blockade prevented such an ambitious plan. The only novelty for the new year 1918 was the coordination of artillery and Stortruppen as a neutralizing rather than a destructive element. When the German army launched the spring offensive on the Western Front, the Stortruppen once again performed great feats. For instance, on the 21st of March of 1918, several groups of Stortruppen opened a breach in the British Fifth Army in Picardy, right at the junction between the French and British forces, causing a general and chaotic enemy retreat. This success was followed by similar victories in Amiens and Reims against British, French, and American soldiers, before the announcement of the end of the First World War in 1918. With Germany's humiliating defeat in the First World War and the harsh clauses of the Treaty of Versailles, the newly born Weimar Republic entered an unprecedented social crisis. From the Kiel Mutiny that led to the so-called German Revolution to the Spartacist uprising inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the country was plunged into a whirlwind of uncontrollable violence that ultimately gave rise to a resurgence of nationalism embodied by the Freikorps. The Freikorps were militias formed from officers and veterans of the Stortruppen of the First World War. Imitating the Volunteer Corps, or Freiwilligen Corps, that old Prussia had assembled in times of crisis during the modern age, such as in the Napoleonic Wars, the Freikorps emerged as a response to the chaos prevailing in Germany, the indignation against the victors' abuses after the Great War, and the urgent need to prevent the spread of communism. These 400,000 fighters were supported by the government of the Weimar Republic, led by Chancellor Friedrich Ebert of the Social Democratic Party, as well as by conservative organizations of a paramilitary nature. The Spartacist Revolution, led by the German Communist Party, KPD, in Berlin, to overthrow the Social Democratic government between the end of 1918 and the beginning of 1919, marked the first baptism of fire for the Freikorps. Chancellor Friedrich Ebert requested the collaboration of the paramilitaries alongside the soldiers of the German Republican Army, Reichswehr. The Freikorps responded immediately, and because most of their men were former Stortruppen combatants, they managed to enter the capital with ease and engage in a bloody urban battle until they crushed the Spartacist League revolutionaries, killing their two leaders, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. When the German Civil War broke out in 1919 between supporters of the Weimar Republic and the revolutionaries of the German Red Army, the Freikorps, who in truth sympathized with neither side, fought alongside the former solely to prevent a communist victory. Thus they supported the existing government by battling left-wing revolutionaries across the entire country, waging fierce combat between 1919 and 1920 in Bremen, Thuringia, Hanover, Saxony, and the Ruhr, from which they always emerged victorious. They also brutally suppressed the mutiny of the Sailors' Division, Volksmarine Division in Berlin, dissolved the Bavarian Soviet Republic, and annihilated the last remnants of the German Red Army during the Battle of Dachau. Beyond the borders of the Weimar Republic, the Freikorps took part in external campaigns in Eastern Europe to control territories claimed by nations that had arisen from the collapse of the Russian Empire, or as colonizing forces taking advantage of the German ethnic communities, Volksdeutsche, that lived in the Baltic states. For example, during the Estonian War of Independence and the Latvian War of Independence, more than 20,000 volunteers of the Baltic Freikorps, later renamed the Iron Division under General Rüdiger von der Goltz, seized the Latvian capital of Riga and founded the United Baltic Duchy. However, they were later defeated by the Estonian army at the Battle of Cesis and forced to retreat across the Lithuanian border, where they were finally defeated by the Lithuanian army at the Battle of Radviliškis during the Lithuanian War of Independence. The Freikorps had greater success in the Greater Poland Uprising against Poland, because after the German victory over the Polish army at the Battle of Annaberg, Germany managed to retain large areas of Silesia and Pomerania. A similar situation occurred with the Sudetenland Freikorps, which took control of the Sudeten region in Czechoslovakia, although the clauses of the Treaty of Versailles forced them to return it to the authorities in Prague. After the end of the German Civil War around 1920, the Freikorps became an essential security force for maintaining order in the Weimar Republic and suppressing ongoing revolutionary outbreaks. In fact, some volunteers who had served in their ranks would later become key figures of the Third Reich, including Heinrich Himmler, Martin Bormann, Sepp Dietrich, Wilhelm Keitel, Albrecht Kesselring, Oskar von Niedermeyer, Reinhard Heydrich, Hans Frank, and Karl Wolff, among others. Yet without doubt, the most notable of them was one Adolf Hitler, who, after serving as a volunteer in the von Epp Freikorps in Munich under General Franz Ritter von Epp, decided to leave the unit to pursue politics and join the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP. When Adolf Hitler began delivering his speeches at the Hofbräuhaus Beer Hall in Munich in 1920, some members of the Freikorps became mesmerized by the oratory of the politician who had just taken leadership of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. One of these officers, Ernst Röhm, who commanded the Munich Freikorps banner, or Reichskriegsflagge in Bavaria, offered Hitler the service of all his men so that they could act as the armed militia of the NSDAP. The union between the Munich Freikorps banner and the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1920 gave rise to the creation of a paramilitary strike force composed of volunteers armed with pistols, who became known as the Brown Shirts because of their brown uniforms and conspicuous armbands bearing the swastika symbol. These fighters, organized as Zeitfreiwilligen, were primarily tasked with gaining control of the streets through urban brawls against communists, while also serving as Hitler's personal bodyguards during his rallies. The latter duty fell to members of the Hall Guard, Schutz, until in 1921 the organization was dissolved due to the large number of recruits, which led to the expansion of the militia with the foundation of the SA, or Sturmabteilung, modeled exactly after the Stortruppen of the First World War. By the end of 1922, the NSDAP under Adolf Hitler, who by then had self-proclaimed himself Führer among his followers, had taken control of both the SA and the Freikorps present in Bavaria and other smaller regions of Germany. However, fearing internal rivalries, Hitler simultaneously established a personal and entirely loyal guard, which he named the Stabswache. Independent from both the SA and the Freikorps, this unit grew from 12 men based in the Torbräu barracks to more than 100 under the command of Captain Julius Schreck. On the 9th of November of 1923, the Munich Putsch took place when the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the SA, the Freikorps, and a garrison of the German Republican Army, Reichswehr, under General Erich Ludendorff, carried out a coup d'état in Bavaria with the aim of launching a National Socialist revolution across Germany and overthrowing the Weimar Republic. While the Freikorps and SA militias blocked the main streets of Munich, the Stabswache took control of the Feldherrnhalle Avenue, and NSDAP cadres arrested the entire Bavarian government at the Bürgerbräukeller beer hall. However, as the National Socialists marched arm in arm toward the soldiers of the German Republican Army, Reichswehr, near the Feldherrnhalle Avenue, the latter opened fire and charged against them, wounding Hitler himself, who was arrested, and immediately crushing the entire rebellion. As a consequence of this resounding failure, the NSDAP collapsed politically, and all Freikorps units throughout the country were dissolved by government decree, with the exception of the SA. After Adolf Hitler's release from Landsberg prison in 1924, the Führer understood that he needed a personal guard far more loyal than any he had previously relied upon, and, at the same time, capable of eliminating opposition from the streets. Thus, in April of 1925, he once again enlisted Captain Julius Schreck, who had led the now-defunct Stabswache, to form the Schutzkommando with a handful of volunteers drawn from the disbanded Freikorps and veterans of the Stortruppen of the Great War. This organization, which grew from a few dozen men to slightly more than 100, was renamed the Sturmstaffel, and finally, upon the recommendation of aviator Hermann Göring, was redesignated as the Schutzstaffel in honor of an air squadron from the First World War. However, its most famous abbreviation would be SS. According to the SS directives, candidates were initially selected by sending circulars to various regional groups of the NSDAP requesting volunteers who met specific criteria: men between 25 and 35 years of age, registered as local residents with the police, endorsed by 2 sponsors who could vouch for them, in good physical condition, strong, healthy, and free from disease, and able to demonstrate strict discipline. Once admitted, the militiamen were organized into sections of 11 men, a leader and 10 combatants, known as Zehnerstaffel, and wore the black uniform adorned with the red swastika armband and topped by a cap bearing the skull insignia Totenkopf, which had been worn by the Stortruppen during the Great War. The SS experienced their first baptism of fire at the end of 1925 in Chemnitz, when 50 militiamen from that city and nearby towns such as Dresden, Zwickau, and Plauen escorted senior NSDAP members to deliver a speech in a district largely dominated by communist voters. Despite several hundred paramilitaries from the German Communist Party, KPD, attempting to disrupt the rally by launching an attack with knives and iron bars, the SS members defended themselves with efficiency and discipline, repelling all their opponents and severely beating the assailants. Thanks to this street victory, the NSDAP militias came to control not only the city of Chemnitz, but also much of the surrounding Saxony region. By April of 1926, the SS had expanded their ranks to 1,000 combatants across 75 Schutzstaffel groups distributed throughout Germany. The coordination of this force fell under the SS command, SS Oberleitung, initially held by Julius Schreck, who later stepped down to become Hitler's personal bodyguard and driver, being replaced by Josef Berchtold. It was Berchtold who introduced the title SS Leader or Reichsführer, a position he held until March of 1927, when he was dismissed and succeeded by Erhard Heiden, who in turn retained the post until the 6th of January of 1929, when Heinrich Himmler definitively assumed command. With Heinrich Himmler at the head of the SS as Reichsführer, the organization underwent a complete restructuring and significant expansion, reaching thousands of members. Among his first actions was a personal meeting with Adolf Hitler, during which he convinced him to make the SS the primary armed branch of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, at the expense of Ernst Röhm's SA, which had become a public order problem and whose loyalty was in doubt. Henceforth, young men as young as 18, the initial minimum age had been 25, were admitted, provided they paid for their own uniforms and equipment. Himmler also introduced a ritualistic culture dedicated to preserving pan-Germanic traditions and maintaining racial purity through examinations, outdoor camps, and athletic trials. As a result of these initiatives, and of the SS being granted the honor of guarding the Blutfahne, the blood-stained flag from the Munich Putsch and the principal emblem of the NSDAP, along with an intense propaganda campaign through pamphlets and articles in the newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, the organization experienced considerable growth by 1930. Unexpectedly, on the 1st of April of 1931, some leaders of the SA attempted to seize control of the National Socialist German Workers' Party by occupying its offices in Brandenburg, Hesse, Pomerania, Mecklenburg, and Silesia. They met, however, with fierce opposition from party militants, especially from the SS. Thanks to the loyalty of SS guards in the capital, Berlin, the SA members elsewhere hesitated to act, and thus the coup organized by General Ernst Röhm failed throughout the country. These events, which concentrated greater power within the NSDAP around the Führer, also deepened the psychological divide between the SS and the SA, a tension that would later erupt into open conflict between the two organizations. By 1932, the SS numbered more than 50,000 members, including 900 officers and 49,100 soldiers, distributed across 40 regional commands known as Standarten, which were subdivided into SS brigades. Although their total strength still fell short of the more than 1 million members of the SA, they were sufficient to confront the 130,000 communist paramilitaries of the Red Front, Roter Frontkämpfer, who, under the German Communist Party, had inflicted numerous casualties on National Socialists in attacks and street clashes. In fact, the show of force displayed by the SS and SA was enough to pressure the cabinet of Franz von Papen into preventing a ban on political uniforms, an outcome that would have been a severe blow to the NSDAP's public image. According to their slogan of 1932, the SS adopted the phrase, "The best days were the days of struggle. Die Kampfzeit war die beste Zeit." This referred to the fact that during that year, the SS suffered their heaviest losses in urban fighting, as the Red Front killed 13 of their members and wounded more than 100. However, despite these hardships, by January of 1933, the SS's efforts bore fruit. During the electoral campaign, the NSDAP encountered little interference thanks to the efficient security provided by the SS, and Adolf Hitler ultimately won the elections, becoming Chancellor of the Third Reich. When, in 1933, the German parliament, Reichstag, was set on fire, Chancellor Adolf Hitler, acting as Führer, drafted a decree on the 29th of February, granting police powers to both the SA and the SS, which were also supplied with weapons from the German Republican Army, Reichswehr. From that moment on, the SS units, now transformed into a new auxiliary police force under Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, began systematic arrests of both right and left-wing opponents, beat anyone who resisted, and even discreetly assassinated individuals considered especially dangerous. They also carried out attacks against the Jewish community and organized boycotts of Jewish-owned businesses. Indeed, once prisons and jails became overcrowded, the SS opened the Dachau concentration camp on the outskirts of Munich to hold the thousands of political prisoners. This facility was soon followed by Sachsenhausen near Berlin and Buchenwald near Weimar, both of which came under the administration of the Death's Head Office, or Totenkopfverbände. While the SS and SA dismantled the remnants of the Weimar Republic, the divide between the two organizations became wider than ever due to their irreconcilable differences. General Ernst Röhm's SA advocated a second National Socialist revolution, one far more radical than the first in both economic and social terms. In contrast, Heinrich Himmler's SS preferred to preserve the existing order established by the Führer, in order to advance the revolutionary process more gradually and avoid provoking a reaction from the conservative officer corps of the German army, which regarded National Socialism as a form of disguised communism. During those tense months of rivalry, SS members mockingly referred to their SA counterparts as filets, Fleischschnitten, claiming that they were brown on the outside and red on the inside. This growing confrontation, combined with the threat posed by the SA's 2 million paramilitaries, 20 times the size of the German army, forced Hitler to make the decision to purge its ranks and secure their complete loyalty. Unexpectedly, between the 28th and the 30th of June of 1934, the SS launched a series of surprise raids against SA leaders and other figures suspected of disloyalty within the NSDAP and the Chancellery, in an episode that became known as the Night of the Long Knives. Most of these arrests and executions took place at night and without warning, resulting in the elimination of the entire SA command structure. Among the dead were General Ernst Röhm, who was shot in his cell, as well as Captains Karl Ernst and Edmund Heines, who were executed. The SS also took advantage of the opportunity to eliminate other perceived enemies, including dissident military officers such as Generals Kurt von Schleicher and Ferdinand von Bredow, former National Socialist leader Gregor Strasser, Erich Klausener, the head of the Catholic Action Party, and the Bavarian governor Gustav von Kahr, whose skull was smashed with clubs. Once the Night of the Long Knives ended, with more than 300 executions, the SS had achieved total control over the SA, which was then placed under the command of Victor Lutze, a man entirely loyal to the Führer. From that moment on, the SS became the most powerful organization in Germany. Officially, on the 20th of July of 1934, Adolf Hitler renamed the organization the Allgemeine-SS. Comprising 200,000 men at that time, the SS not only assumed the role of the new political police of the Third Reich, but would also go on to exercise control over much of Europe during the Second World War. Becoming a member of the SS was not an easy task during the period that encompassed the existence of the Third Reich, from its beginnings in 1933 until its end in 1945. Both the selection process and the subsequent training required candidates to possess a combination of intellectual aptitude and rigorous physical conditioning in order to join an organization that enjoyed the status of an elite corps. Selection. Initially, the former Freikorps or Freikorps served as the main source of volunteers for the emerging SS of the Weimar Republic, along with some veterans of the First World War and members of the SA. This kind of Germanic elite, composed of the generation that preceded the rise of the Third Reich, changed with Adolf Hitler's ascent to power in 1933. From that moment on, the SS began recruiting primarily from the ranks of the Gendarmerie and the Hitler Youth until 1934, after the purge of the SA during the Night of the Long Knives, when recruitment focused almost exclusively on young German men in general. Out of every 100 candidates who applied to join the SS, only 10 were selected due to the organization's strict requirements. Upon presenting themselves at the offices, applicants were required to have a clean criminal record, to demonstrate politically correct behavior from their parents, to be free from hereditary diseases, and to possess a purely Aryan family tree tracing back to the mid-18th century. Once these 4 prerequisites were verified, the Racial Commission, composed of experts in medicine and eugenics, subjected the candidate to a series of medical examinations. These tests assessed the shape of the head, the color of the eyes, a minimum height of 1 meter and 75 centimeters, and an excellent physical build, with particular emphasis placed on the proper proportion between the legs and the torso, as well as between the upper and lower parts of the legs. Finally, the last stage consisted of a discipline test, during which the candidate was asked a series of questions that he had to answer calmly, neither too submissively nor too arrogantly. After all these tests were completed, the evaluators assessed physical appearance, racial purity, and political ideology to determine whether or not the candidate would be admitted into the SS training. When a candidate was accepted into the SS, he initially received the black uniform without insignia, as he was not yet a full member of the organization. During this period, the recruit underwent intense physical and ideological instruction. In September, he was officially appointed as an SS cadet, received the insignia for his uniform, and was issued his membership card. Only 2 months later, every 9th of November, coinciding with the anniversary of the Munich Putsch, the cadets became soldiers and swore an oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler, thereby becoming full members of the Black Order. Upon their promotion to soldiers, the former candidates devoted their days to civil occupations and apprenticeships, while at night or during weekends they attended meetings and assemblies organized by the Allgemeine-SS. Their duties primarily included a mandatory full-time service in the National Labor Service, Reichsarbeitsdienst or RAD, where they participated in public works programs. After completing this period of service, SS soldiers entered the German Army, Wehrmacht, for a period of 2 years. In parallel with the National Labor Service and prior to joining the German Army, SS members received military training in the use of all types of weapons and in dealing with the most challenging combat situations. After completing their service in the German Army, they returned to civilian life, where they underwent final instruction consisting of ideological indoctrination on the laws and core concepts of the Black Order, as well as the code of honor, discipline, and marriage. After successfully completing this long process, the members were presented with the SS dagger and granted the title of Veteran of the Black Order. SS Oath. I swear loyalty and courage to Adolf Hitler in his capacity as Führer and Chancellor of the Reich, and I promise to him and to those he designates to hold authority over me, obedience unto death. The SS schools, or Mannschaftshäuser, were established in 1935 for those members of the SS who did not wish to pursue civilian professions and instead preferred to study for a university degree. Thus, a number of educational centers were created, featuring residences known as Junkerschulen, which consisted of groups of 10 to 15 students per house, located near institutes or universities. Interestingly, while these SS cadets received academic preparation in their respective intellectual fields, they were also required to participate in a series of extracurricular activities that included team sports and athletics, as well as a special 2-week winter course held at the Military Academy of Bad Tölz. During the summer holidays, outdoor camping trips were organized, usually involving long marches in northern Germany or in the Alpine mountain range. These activities undoubtedly helped shape future SS members for both teamwork and survival in nature. Race. All members of the SS were selected, catalogued, and classified according to their so-called Aryan race and biological origin. Following this pattern, a series of physical examinations and genealogical analyses were conducted on each applicant's ancestry. These studies identified a total of 8 branches of the so-called Aryan people, which were as follows: Nordic, Alpine, Mediterranean, Dinaric, Baltic, Armenoid, Iranic Afghan, and Indic, excluding any form of racial mixture. Originally, the SS were conceived as an elite of the supposedly superior Germanic Aryan race, which initially included only Nordic and Alpine types. However, with the outbreak of the Second World War, other categories such as Baltic, Dinaric, and Mediterranean were gradually accepted. In fact, by the middle of the conflict, the racial question within the SS had increasingly lost importance in favor of an anti-communist crusade, and the Black Order eventually evolved into a multiracial army. Within the Waffen-SS, this included Slavs, Arabs, Indians, East Asians, and even Black Africans. The only groups strictly excluded were Jews, Poles, and Roma, Gypsies, who were never permitted to join the ranks of the SS. Being a member of the Allgemeine-SS meant leading a highly active life, as a policeman, as a soldier, and also by taking part in a series of civilian activities primarily focused on leisure and culture. Within this sphere, sports, religion, and social welfare played a crucial role in fostering a sense of belonging and affiliation within the SS. Sports. Sports were among the most prominent activities within the SS, as physical training was included in all of its daily programs. Following this cult of the body, which the organization borrowed from fascist Italy, numerous sports clubs were opened throughout the nation, dedicated to athletics, skiing, motorsports, fencing, boxing, football, mountaineering, and many others. At the same time, the National Socialist League for Physical Training, National Sozialistischer Reichsbund für Leibesübungen, was established, awarding the National Medal for Sporting Merit to the best athletes and encouraging among young people a spirit of personal improvement. Officially, every SS sports club had a Landesverband, regional association, responsible for assessing the physical abilities of each athlete, teaching artificial respiration techniques, and promoting first aid training courses so that members could obtain the corresponding certificates. As this athletic branch grew within the organization, a standardized uniform was adopted consisting of a sleeveless shirt that could be white or green, bearing the SS runes across the chest. Religion. When the Allgemeine-SS assumed its share of power within the Third Reich in 1933, most of its members were of Catholic or Protestant religion, or simply declared themselves agnostic or indifferent to divine matters. All that changed in 1934 when Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler, who was a staunch anti-Christian and hated the Church, banned Catholic and Protestant beliefs within the organization in order to impose in their place a neo-pagan religion based on the ancient Germanic and Indo-European cultures. The Black Order recognized deities of the Vikings and Nordic peoples of Northern Europe and Scandinavia, such as Odin or Thor, and also required the replacement of the word God with Gott in speech. As for its members, all were forced to renounce their Christian faith and adhere to neo-paganism, while the new generations admitted were already indoctrinated in the new religion. Numerous rites were adopted by the SS from Nordic paganism, especially for the weddings or baptisms of its members, although without a doubt the most striking ceremonies were the solstices. For example, during the Julfest, or winter solstice, SS soldiers worshipped the solar god who rose again from his ashes. While during the summer solstice, the guards remained in formation as the youth enjoyed military songs until dawn to evoke the end of darkness and the return of light. Social and economic assistance. The social welfare activities within the Allgemeine-SS were administered by the Rasse- und Siedlung-Hauptamt Department, which was funded through private donations from its own members. Starting in 1935, this office evolved until the creation of the Economic Assistance Section, which provided aid to all those men who had suffered material or financial losses during the struggle for power, as well as to those members who were also facing financial difficulties. This entire Solidarity Fund was created thanks to the contributions of officers and soldiers who, contributing according to their means, helped to build a strong and solid social security system. The Family Office was another of the Allgemeine-SS agencies that cooperated in providing money to widows or orphans who had lost a husband or father, in addition to offering other services, such as a social worker for the families, who was in charge of personal counseling and responsible for the children's education. There was even a department aimed at SS members who had reached old age or had retired, whose function was to organize entertainment activities for the elderly, such as going to concerts, watching movies, listening to the radio, and providing them with all kinds of books and magazines for their leisure time. The SS family, the fundamental pillar of the SS and of the National Socialist state in general, was the institution of the family. As a key element for maintaining the continuity of the German people and the perpetuation of the Aryan race in the Third Reich, the Allgemeine-SS devoted time and effort to fiercely defending the concepts of marriage, children, and the home. Marriage. The SS Engagement and Marriage Order, approved by Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler on the 1st of December 1931, required men aspiring to marry to meet a series of conditions, and the prospective wife to pass specific rules and tests in order to be allowed to marry. The steps to follow were as follows. The woman had to prove her racial purity. The woman could not have any physical or mental illness or disability. The woman had to possess a clean genetic heritage and pure blood, with Aryan ancestors dating back at least to the mid-18th century. The woman had to undergo an examination conducted by medical experts to determine her fertility through a series of reproductive tests. The couple's ages could not differ greatly. The couple had to share certain physical compatibilities to ensure a fertile union. Once the candidates for marriage passed these tests, the SS granted authorization for the couple to marry. However, if a wedding took place without prior permission, or if permission had been denied by the organization, the member was permanently expelled from the SS. As for SS women wishing to marry a man outside the Black Order, the man was required to undergo similar examinations. SS weddings were celebrated according to the pseudo-pagan Germanic rites characteristic of the various Celtic cultures of Northern Europe. The ceremony was usually held outdoors or in SS buildings decorated with runes and fir branches, and it was presided over by the groom's direct commander. Once the couple stood before an altar shaped like an urn where a flame burned, they made a vow of loyalty, exchanged rings, and received bread and salt as gifts, the former symbolizing fertility and the latter the purity of the earth. Finally, to conclude the celebration, the groom was presented with a copy of Mein Kampf, and the couple exited through a gallery lined with SS troops giving the military salute. SS Engagement and Marriage Order 1. The SS are an association of German men, defined by their Nordic blood and specially selected. 2. In accordance with the National Socialist worldview, and recognizing that the future of our people is based on the selection and preservation of good German blood, free from the contamination of any hereditary disease, it is essential that all members of the ESS obtain authorization from the Reichsführer SS before marrying. 3. Consent for marriage will be granted solely on racial or physical considerations, taking into account congenital health. 4. If a member of the SS marries without first obtaining authorization from the Reichsführer SS, or if he marries despite being denied authorization, he will be expelled from the organization. Children. Officially, all SS couples had the patriotic and racial duty to bring at least 4 children into the world. However, if this was not possible, they were required to adopt racially suitable orphans in order to raise them according to the doctrines of National Socialism. Interestingly, when a couple had their firstborn, Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler would give the parents a blue silk ribbon and bib symbolizing birth, marriage, life, and death, as well as a silver cup and spoon representing eternal nourishment. In fact, when a 4th child was born, he would send a congratulatory letter to the family that read, "You are a link in the eternal racial chain." Baptisms within the SS were also conducted according to pagan and Nordic rites. The baby was first wrapped in an undyed wool shawl decorated with oak leaves, swastikas, and engraved runes, moments before the parents placed their hands on the child's head and pronounced names such as Siegfried, Helga, Karl, Gudrun, Adolf, or Himmler. Remarkably, when a child was born on October 7th, coinciding with the Reichsführer's birthday, Heinrich Himmler would become the child's honorary godfather. Home. Since SS families were very numerous within the Black Order, it was decided to establish colonies by region so that the husband could remain close to both his barracks and his wife and children. Thus, all married personnel were housed in comfortable homes with excellent public services, sports facilities, and even free daycare centers for their little ones. Usually, the colonies of SS members and their families were located on the outskirts of cities, near barracks, or close to the concentration camps run by the Totenkopfverbände agency. The soldiers were housed in areas such as Berlin, Graz, Vienna, Radolfzell, Auschwitz, Oranienburg, Dachau, and Buchenwald, while officers lived in Frankenhausen, Klagenfurt, and Jüterbog. When the Third Reich was founded in 1933, the Reichsführer of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, understood that he needed to expand his organization with the most select men among its ranks. This project, which in the long term would create a generation of pure-blooded Aryans, was based on the children who, educated through the indoctrination schools known as Napolas, would form the future of the German Empire. The Napolas were founded in 1933 as educational centers dedicated to militarizing children, instilling National Socialist values, and preparing them for all kinds of activities related to public service. These institutions were usually located in natural surroundings, such as old castles or monasteries, so that students could breathe fresh air. A total of 19 schools were inaugurated, 17 in Germany, 1 in the Netherlands, and another in the Flemish part of Belgium. Normally, the requirements for admission to the Napolas were to be between 10 and 18 years old. However, since the admission conditions were so strict, only 1 out of every 4 applicants was accepted. Interestingly, members could come from any social class, because if a family could not afford the costs, their stay was completely free, as the state covered all expenses. One of the main sources of funding came from voluntary donations. In fact, since humility was one of the main values promoted by the Napoles, the network of schools adopted the motto, "Be modest, but always stand out." The Napoles courses were directed by experts and teachers who provided students with a very complete academic education covering history, geography, art, music, politics, mathematics, biology, physics, chemistry, and foreign languages. At the same time, great importance was given to the students' physical condition and to the cult of the body, as a wide range of sports were practiced, including rowing, boxing, horse riding, fencing, skiing, gliding, sailing, and football, among others. However, one of the most notable features of the Napoles was the labor experience the children had to undergo to understand the hardships of working life. Those between 6 and 8 years old were turned into farmhands for several weeks and sent to rural farms, while the older students were often sent temporarily to mines or factories as laborers. Thanks to all these experiences, together with mountain camps, neo-pagan rites celebrating the summer and winter solstices, personal values workshops, and talks on racial identity, the future adults who emerged from the Napoles were well prepared to face life's challenges. Another innovation of the Napoles was the creation of female centers aimed at the academic and military training of girls and adolescent young women. Officially, the first women's school to open was the Napola in Akern, located in the Baden region, followed by others in Germany and Austria. Graduates from these institutions later joined the ranks of the SS female section. Upon completing their Napola courses at 18 years of age, the future of the former students could vary greatly, although most had guaranteed employment due to their high level of physical and intellectual preparation. In fact, many continued to serve in the SS because of the excellent professional and economic opportunities offered by the Black Order, while others chose to pursue a university degree funded by the state or were directly recruited by the German army, Wehrmacht, especially those who showed strong potential for leadership positions.